Hello and welcome to Divorced Women Creating Peace. I'm your host, Velma Gallant. Super excited to have you here today. I have a very special guest to share with you today, Lisa Schermerhorn. Lisa has over 20 years of experience as a transformational leader, best-selling author, award-winning speaker, and expert in the field of human behavior, leadership, and personal development. She's also trained in the winner's mindset with Bob Reese, the former head trainer for the New York Jets, and has helped a professional golfer win Golfer of the Year. Lisa was VP of Business Development for an innovative startup company using virtual reality to help clients with pain reduction, memory loss, and stress reduction. As a certified hypnotherapist and master practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming, she's also a Y coach, just like me. She helps entrepreneurs and high performers from where they are to get to where they want to be much faster than conventional coaches. So welcome to the call, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
I'm super excited to have you. As I mentioned in your introduction, we are both Y certified coaches, and that's how we got connected. And we do have other mutual connections. And as we were spending some time together last week, we started having a discussion about divorces and some of the impacts that they can have on us as we develop and grow, and the kind of benefits, which I know a lot of people when they're going through it don't necessarily feel that way, but I know, like me, you walked away with a lot of valuable insight from it.
Absolutely. I'd like to go back to giving everyone a little bit of my mindset before I got married, because as a young girl, when I was in kindergarten, I had minor learning disabilities. And so I grew up thinking that I wasn't smart. And I just realized that I learned differently. But what happened was I spent every summer of my life in summer school. I went on to, just constantly being told that I'd always have to be taken care of. So I met my ex-husband at the age of 19. We were in college, got married young. And I thought as long as my husband was happy and my children were happy, that I could be happy. But I had no sense of self. I had no idea who I was. But I always had this tremendous fear of being alone. It paralyzed me, and it kept me in the marriage far longer than I should have. But I didn't think that I had the capability of being on my own. So when it came time for the divorce, one of the greatest lessons that I had was actually discovering that I had the ability to not only be alone, on my own and be alone, but thrive. And the divorce itself was not amicable. It was a very difficult 3 years. There are things that I wish could have been different, but they're not. But at the same time, I discovered how strong I am. And I discovered that I was a lot smarter than I thought I was.
I love that. I love that. So we jumped in really quick here, and the usual question that I ask is, what was your most valuable lesson from your divorce, and what made that so valuable for you? And there was a couple of things that I heard there. One is that you could be alone and thrive. You are strong, and you were smarter than you ever thought you were.
Yes. Because I was giving my power away to everyone, because I didn't think that I had what it took. I didn't understand what I had to offer. And I had a breakdown about 20 years ago, and I went searching for my own self-discovery. And when I realized that when I went through that transformational period and started to discover who I am, it no longer worked in the marriage.
I recognize that.
Yeah. So it was interesting, because and I was so good at hiding who I was. And I was really good at being a stay-at-home mom. I had my mindset practice, and I had a wellness center, and everything was going along. And what was interesting is, after my divorce, when I really started to step forward into who I am, my daughter said something that I had a lot of mixed emotions because I was kind of heartbroken and happy at the same time. She said, "Mom, I don't even know who you are. I don't recognize this person."
Mm.
So it made me sad that she never got to see the more empowered Lisa. Um, it showed me how well that I had been hiding it from everyone, even myself.
Wow. Wow. I think what you've shared here is some really important information. Giving your power away. That is something that I know I recognize, and I know there's a
Right.
lot of women out there who are going to recognize that in themselves. So your discovery of self, that started in your marriage then?
Yes. Yes. Because what happened was I realized that I like to be different and that I learned different and that I suddenly found some things that I was really good at, like really good at. And they were things that were unconventional. And
Mm.
because of that, it freaked out my ex-husband. And because I was into all, hypnosis and energy medicine, and I studied a number of other cutting edge techniques, and I was traveling around the world studying with all these master teachers, and he didn't understand it. I couldn't talk about it, and we no longer had anything in common. And the better I felt about myself, and the more I started to stand up for myself and speak up, it didn't work well in the marriage anymore.
Hmm. I'm definitely recognizing that because I do, like you, I think my son was about 2 when I started really exploring my growth. And I know that I, in a lot of ways, like you, I don't like doing things the normal way, and
Mhm.
I am different, and I love that I'm so different. And that can contribute to a divorce happening, especially when we come to own ourselves.
Right. Right. And I love the title of your podcast, Divorced Women Creating Peace, because the greatest thing that I had to do for myself first was create peace within myself.
Mm.
And as I did that, it's so easy to help others. It's much harder, especially when you're a coach, to do that work for yourself. And what I realized was that I had to stop blaming him for all the problems in the marriage because, as many people have heard the saying, for every finger you point at someone else, there's three fingers pointing back at you. And so I had to take responsibility for my part of the marriage was the fact that I didn't speak up. I let things happen. I gave my power away. And so I allowed this behavior and this to happen. And so my poor ex-husband was blindsided when I finally first started speaking up because he's like, "Wait a minute, I thought everything was fine. Where is this coming from?" Because I finally started to have a voice. And
Hmm.
and so in that I had to forgive myself as well as forgiving him, and that gave me the most peace. And for anyone who's familiar with something called the Ho'oponopono, which is an ancient Hawaiian practice, there's been many books written on it, and there's lots of YouTube information, but it's a very simple prayer that can create magic. And it goes, "I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you." And the more I did that, the more I released, the more at peace I was. But not only was I at peace, I started manifesting more. Because when we
Mm.
have these negative beliefs, they
Hmm.
block us. I always say it's like you want to get to a destination, and then there's these giant boulders sitting there on this giant highway that I put there. And then I'm bitching at the other person that they're there. So by removing those blocks, it allowed me to write a book that took me over 10 years to write, probably close to 20. I always knew I had a book in me, but I wasn't. So I had to forgive. I had to let go. And the thing that I was most proud of that was when I wrote, because he was 30 years of my life, so he was
Mhm.
part of the book in many stories, that I was able to shift the way I felt about him and write about him in really a good light and see him for who he truly is, and that we were both doing the best we could. And I even dedicated the book to him, one of the people that I dedicated to him. Now, we haven't spoken about this. I don't even know if he knows about the book. And that doesn't matter because I did it for me. And I hope one day he reads it. I don't know if he will or not, but it was really powerful for me to find that peace within me first.
I love that. I love that. One of my favorite definitions of forgiveness is remembering without hurting anymore.
Yes.
And I, again, I recognize a lot of that. I know that, so I did have a high conflict divorce as well. And I did manage to transform it in a way where now, we're 8 years later, um, I can actually have conversations with my ex-husband around our son that are very easy and wonderful. We went and watched our son perform. He is a music artist, and we both went to the same event, watched our son perform, had great conversations around it. And I'm so grateful that I was able to do that. One of the beliefs that I had was that if I didn't fix my marriage, because it was my second marriage, then I was a failure.
Hmm.
And once I transformed that belief, that made some big differences in how I interacted with my ex-husband.
Well, what's interesting about that is that, there's this belief that we only have one person for the rest of our life, right? And the person who we're with is a direct reflection and mirror of who we are at that time. So
Mm,
when I met my ex when I was 19, we were the perfect connection. We had so much fun together. And I never had one doubt when we married. I was just like, I was all in. I was crazy in love with him, and I thought we were going to be together forever. I never imagined a divorce. That broke my heart. The hardest thing about divorce for me was the loss of my family. My
mhm.
kids were grown, so I feel lucky that I didn't have to do the every other week or every couple days kind of thing. My kids were both out of seniors in college at the time, so I didn't have to deal with that. But I've watched friends go through that, and that's very hard. I can't even imagine.
Yes, my son was 12 when we separated the first time. And so we did have to deal with a lot of that kind of thing. In a lot of ways, like I know in the beginning it was like, this is horrible, can't
Mhm.
stand that this is happening like this. But in a lot of ways, it actually helped prepare me for the time when he would be grown up and out on his own. So there, in a
Right.
lot of ways, it helped me become an empty nester.
And the other part of it is that you were also forced to communicate because they were going back and forth.
Mm,
Because my ex and our kids were grown, we didn't have to. We still don't. We have absolutely no reason to communicate whatsoever unless it's an event, that's
mhm.
around our kids. And even then, we don't have to. So it's a very different dynamic that we never had that opportunity to have to work things out to learn to communicate amicably. And I pray and hope that it will, that will happen. So we shall see.
I get that. Like for myself, the first 3 years of our separation, I actually chose to go modified no contact. Was that he could only communicate with me by email. That gave me the space to do a lot of healing because, of course, as I said, it was a high conflict divorce. At the end of the day, what I realized was that if I didn't figure it out, I was deferring that responsibility of communicating with my ex-husband to my son. And I didn't want that. I
That's
didn't
a lot
want
of
that for him at
pressure.
all. It
That's a lot
is.
of pressure.
There's going to come a day where he may choose to get married. He may choose to have children. And then he's the one who ends up juggling his parents. And I
Right.
didn't want that. Right. So, and what it took was working on me, because the reality is he's still the same man.
Yeah.
I experience him differently because I'm different.
Exactly. Exactly. And it was interesting because my daughter had a housewarming party 2 summers ago, and she happened to buy a house that is identical to the one that she grew up in with her boyfriend. And he was there with his girlfriend. And I remember she even had this party in the backyard, set it up like I used to do Fourth of July party. And I said to her, Mom, I said to her, do you realize that you have replicated your childhood here? And she said, Mom, I had the perfect childhood. And so even though we had our issues, she doesn't think of things that way.
Mm-hmm.
And being in that backyard felt like I was time traveling because it looked so much like our house that we shared for 10 years with the kids where they grew up, a
Mm-hmm.
good part of their childhood. Every time I turn around, I would see him and I felt like I had gone back 10 years and I was like ready to ask him to do something to help out. And I'm like, can't do that anymore.
That's funny. That's kind of cool, actually. Because what I love about what you're sharing is that how your daughter experienced it was a wonderful experience, and that speaks to what you and your ex-husband were able to create for them. And it
Right.
does point to how um, we each have our own individual experience of things.
Yes, it's true.
So how did you shift, or did you shift the relationship that you had with your daughter? Because you had said earlier that she had made a comment to you that, I don't know who you are, I don't recognize you.
Part of what happened was even though my ex had, uh, even though he had initiated the divorce, um, there was a lot that happened around the languaging of why it happened, and that the brunt was put on me, which
Mm,
created, children need, even though they're grown children, needed someone to blame and to be angry. So the
mhm,
fact that she suddenly didn't recognize me anymore and suddenly had all this pain about the splitting of her family was projecting a lot of that on me. And I knew it was happening. I made a promise not to say anything bad about their father. I was
mhm,
only correcting information that might have been incorrect. But other than that, I did everything I could to keep the kids out of it. But
mhm,
because they were in a lot of pain, there was a couple of years, 2 years at least, that I had to let my daughter vent on me and really vent her pain. And I knew what she was doing. It still hurt. I did my best not to take it personally because I knew that I was the best mom that I could be. At the
mhm.
same time, it still hurt and I was hurting. And I couldn't tell her that I was hurting as much because she didn't want to hear that. So she thought that I was so happy now that and done with everyone, which was not the case at all. And that was a very painful thing. And my son as well. Now things are much better. It's hard. They live 4 hours away, so I don't get
Mm,
to see them as often as I do. But they've accepted. They see how different we are, and they understand it now. And they are actually happy for both of us, which was a great blessing. Um, but for me, and it's in the first chapter of my book, there's a whole story of how I had to get the courage to actually leave my husband because I was so terrified of being alone. I had been studying with this woman who got certified as a a firewalk facilitator and teaching people how to walk fire, walk on glass, broken glass, bend rebar and arrows from your throat. And she asked me if I wanted to go and be part of it. And the first night, Sunday night, we were informed that to graduate the following Saturday, we had to walk 40 feet of red hot coals. And at first, I thought it was a joke. I thought she was just saying that to scare us. And then I realized it wasn't. And I went into a breakdown. And I paid attention to the voices that were in my head and how I was speaking to myself, because I watched the other people in my class who were all about it and very excited. And I went into this whole place of fear. And I realized that that was a metaphor for how I was living my life. I was so fearful about everything. But I walked the glass, 4 feet of glass. I bent rebar. I still have it in my yard, this giant 10-foot piece of rebar. Broke arrows. And we were walking 7 to 10 feet of red hot coals every night, practicing for our big walk at the end. And I remember I was beside myself. I was convinced that I was going to end up in the hospital. There was no way that I thought I was going to survive that. And one of the people in the class looked at me and he asked me, "How much fire have you walked this week?" And I was like, "Well, at least 7 to 10 feet a night." He said, "How much fire is that?" I said, "Well, it's well over 40 feet." He said, "Exactly. You've already walked 40 feet. Now go." And it was my easiest walk all week. And I had no burns on my feet. And then when I went home, I drove home that night with the air conditioner blowing on my flip-flops because they were still holding heat. They just weren't burned.
Yeah.
And I knew, because how many times do women before they get divorced say to themselves, how will I know when it's the time? You go through some people go through years, decades of knowing that it's not right, but they stay. They're not ready. They're not ready. And then people kept saying, you'll know. And it was that moment I got home. And it was a switch that went on in me and just said, it's time. It's time. And that was when I started to have the conversation with him. And then 3 months later, I was driving to Vermont by myself, starting my life over again, not knowing a soul.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting when you mentioned about how the relationship went with your daughter and where everybody was then and where you guys are now. And I mean, I think moms often are that safe place to hurt.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, I let my son see me hurt because I wanted him to see that this does happen. It's okay to hurt. And he got to see me get stronger and he got to see me heal. And I know the gift that I got out of that was there was a number of gifts that I got out of that. One was that when my son was 19 years old, and it was early in the pandemic, so we snuck together and had lunch together. He was living with his dad at the time, so we snuck out and had lunch together. And we're sitting there, and he goes, I was looking back at, because he used to live stream, that was part of his coping mechanism. I looked back at a bunch of those videos of you, and I'm not going to use the words he used, but I was a real jerk to you, and I'm sorry. And I cried right in front of him because it was like, wow, getting that gift later. And I looked at him, I said, I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt, but I knew it wasn't personal.
Right. Exactly. And you know what? My daughter did say to me at one point, we had moved from one state to another and she was in high school, and that was very traumatic for her. And she was taking it all out on me. And I was like, who is this child? Because she was all about, being the right, doing the right thing. She was always so well behaved. And then this new being started lashing out and getting angry. And she said to me years later, I'm so sorry that I took it out on you. You were the safe one. And I felt safe to take it out on you. And I said,
Mhm.
yeah, I understand, but it was still a lot. Oh, I see someone on Facebook saw strength from the fire walk. Oh yeah.
Yes.
I have no interest in ever walking fire again, by the way.
Well, I think once you do it once, it's not really necessary from there. But in a lot
Exactly.
of ways, I think too, um, sometimes our divorces are that firewalk. Like
Yes.
I know for me, as I was going through it, because it was high conflict and um, and if my son knew why it was happening. He understood. His experience was I love my mom, I love my dad. My dad hurt my mom. What do I do with this? Right. And so that's where a lot of his anger and everything like that came in. But that's our firewalk
It
because
absolutely is. It's like the phoenix. And I tell you how many women that I know who've come out of divorces. I think and men too come out
Mhm,
of it because we start to look at ourselves. I
mhm,
started doing things that I never did before. When I was married, I never touched a power tool. I moved to this house and my deck was a mess. I have 1,200 square foot wraparound deck. And I was like, it would have cost me thousands of dollars to repair. I had a
mhm,
friend loan me a belt sander. I got knee pads and I got on my hands and knees and I sanded that entire freaking deck. I stained it. I did it all myself. I was covered in dust. And I mean, I was so proud of myself, but
mhm,
and that was another empowering thing. I started to fix things around the house. When you're married for a long period of time, fault to certain behaviors and things around the house. And there isn't even a spoken word about it. You just know. And I had to start taking on and develop everyone has a feminine and a masculine side. And
mhm.
I had to start really developing the divine masculine in me and really balance those out. And that I think is a huge key because also women, when they get divorced, my understanding is it goes out of whack the other way. They become female versions of men because they overcompensate. And the
Mhm.
perception about the feminine is that it's weak. And it is not. It's the divine feminine is powerful.
Absolutely. I know inside of my marriage I was overcompensating often, and so I became a real doer.
Hmm.
But it was interesting because as I stepped out of it and started claiming myself, I still was a doer, but it was different. I changed headlights on my car. Never would have done that before, but here I am changing headlights on my car and feeling super proud of myself, but at the same time, um, learning how to say no to things. Like I remember wanting my marriage back so bad, and every time it would seem like we were going to reconcile, we try and work it out. We tried reconciling a couple of times, and it never did work out. And there came a point where he was trying to reconcile, and I remember declaring to God, I'm like, if you're promising me, because I kept seeing things like reconciliation and restoration and all of that everywhere, like everywhere. And there came a point where it was like, okay, but if you're promising me my marriage, I said, God, I don't want it anymore. And I could almost hear it audibly. I was not promising you your marriage. I was promising you you.
Yes. And that's the one thing. And I see the Facebook user said, I took down a satellite dish. You go, girl. Whoever did that. That's amazing. But yeah, that empowerment that comes
Mhm,
with that is really quite remarkable. I don't even recognize the old me. And
mm,
we went to 5 different marriage counselors for 10 years. I mean, we tried
yeah.
everything. I mean, I will always love him. And I am so grateful for the years that I had with him. And, you know, it was a tremendous gift. But at the same time, the Lisa who's here now, and I'm sure the my ex who's there, if we went out on a date together, neither one of us would probably go on a second date with each other.
No,
And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that you're two very different people now.
Yeah.
Very different, looking for very different things when you know more about who you are. And that's the thing. One last thing that I also think is very important is knowing your values. I had no sense of values. I didn't know who I was. At 19 years old, I assumed that what was important to me would be important to anyone that I would be in a relationship with. It didn't dawn on me that other people had different upbringings and other things that were important. So once we got married, I realized that I never had the deep conversation and never really thought about the things that were important to me and what that would look like in the marriage, and if he had the same values and wanted, how to raise the children and what that would look like.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge mistake that a lot of couples bring in when you're 19, 20. Oh, he's so cute.
What's important to us then is absolutely not anywhere near what's important to us now.
Exactly.
I mean, like you, I look back on my marriage and we had a blast.
Yeah.
We had so much fun. And of course, the biggest gift that I got out of it was our son. Wouldn't trade that for anything. And I got to grow. I got to become the woman that I am today through that marriage. So like you, I'm super grateful for what I did get out of it, in spite of some of the fun. So Lisa, thank you so much for coming and sharing the wisdom that you got out of your divorce and the growth that you got through it. I want to make sure. So this is the name of Lisa's book, In Every Belief is a Lie.
Actually, and if you see the word belief, I'm sorry, it's LIE is in the middle of it.
I can't unsee that now.
Yeah,
I will
that
never
crazy?
unsee that.
Yeah.
And I know beliefs are something that I work on very deeply with the ladies that I work with. So the minute I saw that in your book, I'm like, oh, and it's so true.
Yeah, we're all programmed. We're all programmed, and it's a matter of what do we do to deal with that programming? What's really authentically ours, and what are we doing, and how are we living vicariously through other people?
Right. And so when you are getting the opportunity to look at this information in the show information, there are links to the book. Go check it out. I know I've picked it up for my Kindle because I definitely want to read that. And the other thing I want you to do is to head on over to Divorced Women Creating Peace. There's a free report there for you. The top 3 obstacles for women after divorce. Head on over there and gain that, and head on over to our Facebook group as well. We'd love to have you.
And a real quick thing, I wish that I had known you while I was going through my divorce. It's very expensive to vent on an attorney who's making a lot of money per hour and doesn't want to do that. And having someone who's a support, who's been through it, to hold your hand and get you through it is critical. So I want to thank you, Velma, for the work you do, because I could have used that big time when I was going through it.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone, for coming and joining us this week. I will see you next week with our next absolutely amazing guest. You have a brilliant day.
Thank you.